Now, whenever you look at war, there are 5 principal components of war. I mean, despite war may take place in different theaters, it may have taken place across thousands of years, but the 5 components remain quintessentially the same. They begin with firepower. Firepower is defined as more energy imparted on the target than what the target can absorb. So if you were to take your forefinger or your middle finger and swat it on a fly, that is firepower for the fly, because the fly cannot absorb that force. On your shoulder, it's not firepower because your shoulder can probably absorb that force. The second element is mobility, which is taking this firepower to the point of decision. So whether it's a bow and arrow being fired by a primordial man or an intercontinental ballistic missile, which takes a nuclear warhead from one end of the earth to the other end, it is the firepower being taken to the point of decision. So the same tap on your shoulder, if it was on any other part of your body, chances are it may not be painless, because the mobility has taken it to a point. The men are getting it, right? The third is command. Command is the overall intent of the commander. What does he intend to do? What is the strategic intent? Control is essentially the junior leaders manifesting that intent. And logistics is the last and the final element of the 5 components of war. Every form of war, everything that has anything to do with war fits into these 5 components. Now, we also need to understand the 5 theaters of war. And as you can imagine, warfare first started in land, where basically, well, started with men hurting each other with weapons, with rocks and swords, and then firepower with gunpowder and all of that. And then it moved from this dimension into sea, because that was the next logical step, where humans built ocean-going, sea-going vessels. The third one was the air, and the fourth one was space, and the fifth one is cyberspace. Interestingly, in each one of these domains, when you shifted the theater of battle, doctrines had to be rewritten. So in the army, for example, it was okay. Akbar could send Jai Singh to go and conquer the Deccan Plateau, and he could tell him that every day send a horseman back, and this horseman will tell me the situation, and I will have like intimate control and let you know exactly what to do on a daily basis. Once the naval warfare started, you couldn't do that. Every ship had to be self-contained. You gave them general orders that go out and do what is good for the realm, but you couldn't give them specific orders. The same thing again when the theater shifted to the air, again the entire doctrine changed. When it went into space, the government had to rewrite the rules of recruitment. They had to find new venues of how to bring in. I think there's a lot of talk about this lateral induction happening. The first lateral induction actually happened in the space program, because they had to get scientists and give them equivalents to bureaucrats. And of course, in cyberspace, we have a complete change in doctrine all over again. We have to change the doctrine, and the doctrine doesn't just change because of technology. I remember this anecdote. Some of the people sitting in this room were there as well, where we had a very senior spook who spoke about how we need to develop capability of hacking, offensive hacking against China, because China is one of our biggest adversaries, and we are going to be fighting in cyberspace. At least I've been hearing it for the last 15, 20 years. Until somebody in the audience asked him that, that's great, you will get the capability to hack into Chinese systems. How many people do you have in your systems who can understand Mandarin? And then suddenly he discovered that, so even if you hack into the system, so it requires the entire doctrines to be changed. You have to go back. It's interesting that even now in NDA, there is foreign languages is French, German, all of that, but Chinese is still not taught as a foreign language in the National Defense Academy of India, right? So we have to go back to the doctrines and start changing the doctrines, and this is not a band-aid. This is not a 3-week course in some institute here in Lodi Road ki jaake seekh le Mandarin. It won't work like that. We have to understand the entire dynamics of how this space changes. Now, in these 5 theaters, there is a critical commonality, and that is called the ground of tactical importance. Now, this is a very specific term in the military. Military officers sitting over here will know the exact definition of this term is, it is that piece of ground, the loss of which will render a defender incapable of fighting a successful defensive battle. Correct definition? Good. So in other words, it means it is that piece of ground which, if the defender loses, he or she will not be able to fight a successful battle because it's that pivotal. And in the physical space, I've used the example of Normandy beaches over here, one of the biggest assaults that ever took place in the history of mankind, the D-Day landings. Many of you must have seen it in the movie Saving Private Ryan. Now, that is an example of a ground of tactical importance where the battle for Europe was basically fought in those few kilometers of that beach, and that bridgehead was the decider between success and failure for the Allies and the Axis powers. Now that GTI, the ground of tactical importance, has shifted from a physical asset and become an element of the mind, and I'll show you some examples of that. And I'll show you more importantly, the differences of the sixth dimension. The first is, the first 5 dimensions are either state controlled or state influenced. So whether it's space, whether it's an army, whether it's a navy, air force, these are assets that are controlled by the state, and the state has the ability to influence it or to control it, to lay down all the elements of these 5 dimensions. Their end manifestation is kinetic energy. Now, those of you remember the Stuxnet virus, you remember that? So can anyone very quickly recap what happened?
Basically, they hacked into the Iranian systems. They kind of sabotaged the centrifuge.
Yes, and what happened? The centrifugal?
Over time, they malfunctioned.
And?
Over the course of 3 years, they were redundant.
And they crashed. So the end manifestation of that cyber attack was a kinetic energy damage. Centrifugal, the centrifugal fans were crashed. So it was a kinetic damage. Even in the 5th dimension of cyberspace, it was still kinetic damage. But in the 6th dimension, this is not kinetic damage. There is no asset which is being destroyed. Faith is being destroyed. There's a belief that officers are not taking care of the Jawans in the army. There's a belief that Air Force is parochial towards the army. There's a belief that bureaucracy doesn't take care of, MOD is not. Now, these are elements which have nothing to do with physical assets. These are attacking the will of the soldier to fight. These are attacking the very resolve and homogeneity of that unit. They are putting doubts on the leadership caliber. They are creating dissent between what used to be otherwise homogeneous communities. In the first 5 dimensions, you have very specific warriors whose job it is to do very specific targets. But in Psychops, there is no specific warrior, and you'll see some examples of very, very successful individuals in psychological operations, and they are completely contrarian to any image that you may have had of a warrior. They may be nerds wearing glasses, they may be actually graphic designers, they may be psychological students, they may be subliminal communicators who know how to make you see the word sweet even when the word doesn't actually exist on the slide. They know how to do that. They know what triggers to push and pull. But the last and the most interesting aspect of the 6th dimension, if you look at a threat map of any country, so if India has a threat map and we have our DGMOs and our assessors who keep assessing and looking at force levels, we have for a specific assignment, let's say the SPG is going somewhere, they will look at the threat levels of that place. And usually the threat level is looked at in a hard kinetic manner. So China is a big threat for us because it's got a huge army and a huge navy. Number 2 in this region is Pakistan. Number 3 is Bangladesh, because we are looking at the sizes. Now, interestingly, in the 6th dimension, if you take the 2 countries, let's take China and the US, we don't have the numbers for China, but we know the US has approximately about 10,000 people in their so-called cyber command and cyber war efforts or whatever, defense and offense. But even in that force of 10,000, their technical access group, which is the key people who actually make those sophisticated worms, who understand the code, who can get into assembly level language, they're just about 200 of them. So even in a nation which has enormous amounts of budgets, enormous amount of capability and resources and the ability to recruit talent from anywhere in the world, the people who do the really nerdy stuff is just 200 people. Now 200 people a country like Sri Lanka can raise. If they go on a 7-year program and they design it with the best of the breed in the world, they can get capability which is equivalent in the threat matrix of a country like India. So the geographical resources and the domains specific expertise, that how many tanks you have, how many aircrafts you have, how many aircraft carriers you have, has no meaning in this space. This is truly a democratization of weaponization. Now, your weapon building capability has nothing to do with how many resources you have, what is your forex, how much of imports you can do, what is the ITAR bans that you have on certain kind of technologies. They don't matter at all, and that changes the game dramatically. I'm also very often tempted, and this comes largely from my experience in the National Intelligence Grid, of when I hear these terms in forums such as this, that we need experts who understand this space really well. And it's quite interesting to see that experts leading other experts in this space, because we will see. So all of you have, I'm assuming, a Facebook account or a Twitter account, and neither of them are here now, so you can honestly tell whether, whether you have a Facebook. Can I assume safely? All of you have got it? Yeah, good. So let's start with the awareness level. So this is a story. A friend of mine recently, a small business, he has a small business, about 200, 300 crores, and he engaged a consulting firm to come and do some consulting work with him. He wanted to go to the next level. He wanted to restructure his company. And when he was planning to do that, this consulting firm sent him a term sheet. And the term sheet, I'm just putting an extract over here. The term sheet read something like this. I know it's a little hard to read this in this color contrast. I'll read it for you. You grant our company is this consulting firm which is coming to do the consulting assignment with my friend's company, non-exclusive, irrevocable, worldwide, perpetual, unlimited, assignable, sub-licensable, fully paid up, royalty-free text to write, to copy, prepare derivative works. If you read this, it essentially says, if you give us any data, we will do whatever we want with it, and if you complain, we'll say, fuck off. I mean, they don't say fuck off there, but they essentially say that. And as you can guess, this is the privacy policy of LinkedIn. And the next one is the privacy policy of another company, which says that if you use us, if you were to write a piece of work, if you were to write a letter, if you were to post your picture on our site, we can take that letter, we can write, we can take the text, we can take that poetry, it becomes ours after that. We own it. So if J.K. Rowling had used Google Docs instead of Microsoft Word, then Google would have owned Harry Potter and the entire series technically, right? So this is the awareness levels of people who are. Third company, this company can take pictures from your camera. It can post those pictures, it can read your SMSs, it can write SMSs on your behalf, and it can send those SMSs without your knowledge. And on top of that, they will not take any accountability, because they say that while we will try to keep your data safe, we will try to do that, in an eventuality that something goes wrong, we are completely absolved from any accountability whatsoever. And by the way, we do have a few hacks that take place on a daily basis, just about 600,000 of them. Right? And it's very interesting that in countries where you see protests about privacy, whether you see the rights of minority workers, you see rights, human dignity, and all of that happening, but in the same country, or many countries of the world, there doesn't seem to be a jurisprudence between a conglomerate signing a contract with a 13-year-old minor. And that contract says that if that 13-year-old girl uploads her photo on Facebook, Facebook reserves the right to morph that photo to make that individual look naked and sell that picture to somebody else. And this is a contract that is being signed between a company and a 13-year-old minor, and the nation seems to be okay with it. The jurisprudence, the law seems to be okay with it. Then discussion that is happening is that, whether you will pronounce this as hate tweet or not hate tweet. These are the discussions that are taking place. When we look at the fundamental building blocks, nobody seems to even be looking at those spaces as areas of interest. This is a phrase that we have heard very often. Data is the new oil. I mean, I keep hearing, not now, I've been hearing it for the last 10, 15 odd years. Data is the new oil, data is the new. So if data is the new oil, let's just look at it. That this data that we store, it's supposed to be in clouds. But whose clouds are these? Where are these data being, where is it? Is it even a country anymore? Or is it a company? Is it an individual who controls that company, who decides what he wants to do with the data? These two figures that I have put over here, by the way, these figures are dated. These are almost 3 years old figures. 3 years ago, the US announced that they're going to spend $16 billion in protecting their critical infrastructure. And this is the amount of money they were looking to spend to do protection of their data. The figure that you see on the right at that point was the turnover of the 5 major companies in the US who process data: LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and all of that. So if you look at the capability of the government in terms of its ability to spend resources to protect or to acquire data, and look at the capability of just 5 companies in the world, you will see that maybe the US isn't really the big dad when it comes to data. There are other individuals who actually control that. This was one of my favorite research, Angry Birds. Some of you may have played it. How many of you played it? Oh, nice. So this was one of the best, and I think one of the most pervasive data suction games ever created. The whole purpose of this game was to suction out data. And for those of you who believe that, no, this is very sophisticated, and I mean, users like us won't be taken in by, we put all the permissions and we didn't. So here's an app you might be used to. Those of you, how many of you got Android phones? And how many of you got an app called Torch in it? It's built in actually, it's burnt in. And what did the app do? Can anyone tell me what the app does? Sorry? What does it do? It acts as a torch. So in other words, what it does is if you press that button, it connects that light with your battery. That's what it does, right? And for that, it requires these permissions. I'll read out the permissions. It needs to access your SMSs, take pictures, record audio, precise GPS functions. It does everything. Yes, it does. So I wanted to just, sort of settle the stage on awareness levels when we talk. Because, I hear a lot of the experts sitting here and telling we need to educate the users. We need to tell the users how to use social media safely, and also sometimes I wonder whether these experts have been looking at what functions their Torch is doing. So the situation is actually getting slightly worse, because 108 are the number of the countries who have a dedicated cyber war capability being built. And these include countries like Ethiopia and South Sudan. They have started building this capability because they realize in the asymmetric world, this is the best way for them to actually start creating these capabilities. This was a learning that I got about 6, 7. Have you heard of this term, femtocell? Anyone? You've heard of it. Why don't you just tell everybody what it is? Otherwise, they won't believe me. So femtocell is basically a tower which operates on a pickup van, in a Maruti van. It can be set up right outside in the road. And after that, every call that you make, that tower will masquerade as your regular service provider's tower and take the call from you. It will do what is called a man in the middle, and it will, of course, forward your call. But that call, conversation, everything will be easily heard by this individual who sets up this. The army was also involved in one of these some years ago, you'll remember. So this femtocell does that. And this femtocell actually can be built by downloading instructions from the internet. And the total cost of the components that you need to build it is about $580 if you buy it off Radio Shack. So that is the democratization of acquiring data, or sort of. Anyway, I don't want to get into each one of these elements, but very clearly this space, to my mind, has not even been understood as a requirement of a doctrinal shift. We are still trying to deal with the cyberspace using the tools, the policies, the philosophy. So that's as good as, suddenly this air warfare has started and we are still using bows and arrows to shoot down the aircraft. And of course, committees are sitting to say that let's build a bigger bow because this one is not reaching. And so we need maybe people from the civil to come and pull the bow because maybe they know how. So very clearly, we are forgetting that we are perhaps not appreciating that this is a doctrinal shift taking place and not an incremental change that is taking. And of course, I don't want to get into the media space and see. So neither is deception new in war, nor is fake news new in war. This has both been done for years. I mean, both the examples I've used here are from the Second World War operations of the D-Day landing. Both the landing site, which was originally thought to be Pas-de-Calais and finally did in Normandy, and the fact that an entire phantom army was created, fake news. But today, this capability lies in the hands of individuals. They have the capability to do this. They have the capability to make elections happen one way or the other way. They have the capability to discredit leaders. They have the capability to make you doubt your spouse if they want to. They can actually convince you that, yeah, see? I should. We won't get into it. So, you know, it's a question I ask people when you hear about the Internet of You. And the Internet of You is basically these devices that you'll be placed in your body, pacemakers and insulin dischargers, and you'll be. So how many of you got a device placed on your body that basically tracks what you do? How many have Fitbits? Suddenly you realize there is a device that is tracking exactly where you were last night, whether you were involved in any physical activity or not. All of that stuff is being recorded and it is being shared by individuals. Anyway, so I think somebody must have covered this yesterday, which is I wanted to share with you a very short film. I'm not going to play the full film, but this is a film which is a recruitment film by the ISIS. There are about 800 of such films. It travels under a series called The Flames of War. Sound bada dijiye thoda sa. And essentially uses, take a look at the footage. Take a look at the, take a look at the graphics and see how they have evolved. So they are based on the most modern games, Call of Duty, the Grand Theft Auto, and the scenes that you're going to see over here are copycat scenes.
The references are pretty explicit. This shooting rampage in a house in Sana'a, Yemen, is shot in the same first-person style as the game Call of Duty. And this car rampage, and remember, this is all real violence, has the same reckless driving and reckless shooting as Grand Theft Auto. And less than a week after the movie American Sniper came out, the Islamic State released its own video filled with very similar long-range assassinations. There's even a video of a children's training camp that hosts challenges in a deserted desert arena in the same style as the Hunger Games. And this seems to be working. Roughly 25,000 foreign citizens from more than 100 countries have joined the Islamic State and its branches. And there's been an estimated 70% increase in foreign terrorist fighters worldwide.
So I think a question we got to ask ourselves is that if we were a 16-year-old boy or a girl, and that's our target audience, and there was one form of communication which you saw in the previous slide, and this is the form of communication that you see from the government side, and not just the Indian government, by the way. This is overseas, and we wonder why he is not buying our brand. You know, why is he going and buying the other brand? So very clearly, I think we are not approaching this from a thinking mindset. We are approaching it very much from a reactive mindset. I think we are measuring the wrong dimensions when we are looking at our cyber warriors. We are looking at the wrong space. And no, while this might be humorous and anecdotal, there's a certain level of seriousness underlying this. I think I've just listed 2 or 3 things over here. One is, I think, India's one of the biggest challenges of India, and I have sort of espoused this for the last decade or so, including with friends who head think tanks. I don't think India has a shortage of ideation. Our challenge is in implementation. We have an anti-Eve teasing law. We were the first one to have universal suffrage. We were the first one to, in Asia, to enact the IT laws. We are always out there in terms of our ideation, but it's like a river where the top is flowing fast, but at the bottom it is still, you know, murky, and I think that's our real challenge. So before we rush into a new set of ideation and a new set of policy directives, advisory, which we'll send to the government, I think what we need to do is to find ways and means in which we make this ideation actually rubber meet the road. That, to my mind, is one of our biggest challenges. And in spaces like this, where we are dealing with communication, where we are dealing with alteration of mindsets of people, we have to start looking at entirely new disciplines. like design thinking, like negotiation. I was just talking to Samir, and you're all aware of this incident which took place about a year ago with this Gogoi fellow doing whatever he did in Kashmir, and the jury is out on whether what he did was right or wrong. But the jury is not out on the fact that these are the kind of operations that our young officers will be encountering on a daily basis, much more than that classical, killing the enemy kind of operations. But guess what? I don't know how many of you know this, that your army officer, and there are many of them sitting over here who will endorse what I'm saying, they are never taught negotiation. They are never taught how to negotiate. They are never taught how to de-escalate a situation. They are never been trained to do anything which can make the situation go down. They have always ek goli, ek dushman, no regret, no remorse, no pity. That is the mantra that they have been taught for 18 months in their training and for 10 years in their operations, and then you launch them into Kashmir and expect them to do winning hearts and mind. There is a, the acronym that they have for winning hearts and mind in the army? WHAM. Winning hearts and mind, WHAM. That's the acronym they have. I'm not kidding you. That is the acronym. That is the acronym there, right? So clearly, I think what we are looking at is to create an entirely different set of leadership. And I don't mean leadership in the bureaucracy, in the police, in the army. I mean leadership right down amongst the children, where we are creating what we call T-shaped leaders, leaders who have the ability to look across the spectrum rather than just looking into their own domains. And then we realize that in this space, there is actually no truth, because every truth, let me ask you a very simple question, I'll end with that. How many of you believe that the diversity of India is a strength of India? Just raise your hands. Diversity of India. Yeah. Potential strength. Okay, fine. Potential strength of India. How many of you believe parochialism in India? I will not marry another caste. I will not eat from that place because that community is different. This community is different from me. How many of you believe parochialism is a weakness of India? Raise your hands. But explain to me, in a 5,000, 8,000-year-old civilization, how will you retain diversity without having parochialism? How will you have a tribe in Northeast that retains its traditions, remains separately, if you didn't have parochialism in a country and everybody married everyone and mixed around with everyone, it will all be the same color, the same features? It's serious. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we talk about radicalization, when we talk about narrative building, when we talk about any one of those aspects, it requires us to go from the superficial into the depth, and to say that when we say countering a narrative, you cannot counter narratives. You have to only tell the truth. And if you want to counter the narrative, you have to change the truth. You cannot, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Platoon, those of you remember that Vietnam War, where this commanding officer comes and napalms that entire village, and then one woman comes with a child and he suddenly takes the child and puts her in a helicopter, and because that's his CSR. I've done the CSR, I won the hearts and mind. We can't do that. Very often I hear this refrain from a lot of senior army commanders in various different places, and by army I don't mean just the army, CRPF, BSF. They say that we have won the kinetic operation. Kinetic operation is, by the way, euphemism in the army for the real WHAM. So when they hit hard, they call it kinetic victory. Kinetic is, sounds better than napalm. So kinetic is, and they say that, but we have lost heart and mind. And that's a bit like a surgeon saying that I opened up my patient's chest with an axe, and now I'm not able to stitch it with fine thread. The moment we start acknowledging that some of these basic fundamentals are the things that we got to question. We got to ask, when our leaders go into these conflict areas, do they even speak the language of that area? Do they even know that when I put a barricade over here, how much of the local economy gets affected? Do we even give them tenures beyond 8 months, 9 months, 11 months to operate in an area? Just when the person is beginning to understand what's going on, he gets rotated and a new person comes in over here. Relationships are not allowed to be built, vulnerabilities are not allowed to be exposed, and yet we expect that by carrying out exactly what we were doing for the last 70 years, somehow the 71st time, the result will be different. And I think that is a definition of, Einstein said it, I think, doing the same thing again and again and expecting is insanity. That's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing again and again, but expecting that this time when we do a ceasefire and talks, suddenly something else will happen.